Many thanks for joining in and welcome to the show today. This is Good Morning Africa. We're pleased to have you join us from different parts of the world. This morning we're joined with Programs Manager for YIAGA Africa. She's also one of the lead team members for Watching the Vote. They have been out for some days now covering the Ekiti elections, which was just concluded. They have findings, they have results, and of course there's a lot of details regarding how that result that may now be contested by various candidates, parties, and other stakeholders, how it did emerge. I'm pleased to invite to have this conversation with me, Cynthia Mbamalu. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you.
Well, the Ekiti election is one that will have to be partly what a lot of people may choose to reflect on ahead of the 2019 elections. They say it may provide some level of yardstick and parameters. But before we do go into review of how the election itself did go, let's talk about your pre-election findings and some of the things you talked about and the Watching the Vote team did put together as things that could possibly happen before the election. What were some of those key points?
And I think one of the major points we had, and more like an emerging trend that we had observed from the first, second, third, and the final period, that's the pre-election observation before the elections, was the issue of the voter inducement, which we had cautioned and said, okay, the level of voter inducement in the pre-election environment could impact on the process itself, in a sense that if we don't address that at the pre-election phase, it could result to having vote buying on elections day, which we did see play out. The other was also the level of voter education. We did commend the Electoral Commission that there was an improvement with the voter education going on in the state compared to voter education in Anambra and in Ondo, which were two off-cycle elections before this 2018 Ekiti elections. And while we saw an increase in that, but there was a need to intensify voter education towards the elections, because it looked like towards the elections there was a drop or a reduction in the level of voter education going on in the states and the different local governments, from both INEC, from the CSO, and even the National Orientation Agency. And while we were hammering on voter education was the fact that when it comes to voting, it's one thing to vote, another thing to make informed decision. And what we are yet to get to is to have that democracy where our political culture is one that is informed and is active, and one that is influenced by issues and not necessarily by personalities or handouts from parties during the elections, which is what we currently have. So that was one of the things we observed, the need for more voter education to go on within the states, on the need for issue-based voting and even understanding the process itself. If you'd notice, the ballot paper that was used is different from the ballot paper we've used in previous elections, because we had 35 parties contesting, and what that meant was we had 2 columns on the ballot paper for the different parties. So issues like how do you fold your ballot and the ballot paper, because it's different from the other, and why do we have to have this kind of ballot paper? Because what you do is, if you educate people on the process, it reduces, and even how to thumbprint, it reduces the likelihood of rejected ballots or invalid votes. So that also did play out. And then the other concern we had raised was with respect to security. Now, in our first and second period, we had observed that some local government did have some intimidation and violent attacks, but towards closer to the election, that had dropped, in the sense that we had just one local government where we had an observation, the last week of our findings, where we had incident of hate speech. But beyond that, we had the political parties, the 2 major parties, the PDP and the APC, using the media platforms, both traditional and online media. You'd see the level of hate speech and dangerous speech that was going on between the different parties. And so one of the things we were advising against was for parties to caution their supporters, for one, and also to act responsibly, because as a party you have a responsibility to ensure you promote democratic principles and a political culture that is positive. and then you needed also people to vote for you based on issues. So why not limit your campaigns to the issues, the things you want to do for the people, rather than attack on personalities or attack on parties or parties' image and names? Because that way you reduce the conversation to irrelevant things, and you distract citizens from paying attention to the things that matter. And until we start having issue-based campaigns and issue-based voting, our democracy would still be where it is. And so that was one of the things we're pushing for parties to be cautious, to be responsible and professional. And the other issue was on security. Beyond the incidents we had observed, was also on the deployment, because there was a lot of query on why the number of police, for instance, 30,000 police. We had civil defense deploying, we also had the military, and people had raised an alarm saying, oh, if you're deploying this number, it could deter citizens from coming out to vote because they may feel afraid. Because the thing about elections is some people may want to vote, but because you have created, the parties have heated up the system, the polity, people already were envisaging violence. So if you had followed the news before the elections, you would think Ekiti was a war zone, like news headlines like Ekiti boiling, Ekiti on fire and all. It was basically because the parties had made the system, the policy become so heated up that people just felt they would be violent. And when people already have that fear of violence and you deploy this number of security, what that does is they start to feel that perhaps it's truly going to be violence, and they would rather stay at home for their safety than come out to vote. So we did caution on the deployment of security, but we know that you can't talk elections without election security, and we didn't want a situation where there would be violence and there won't be sufficient personnel to respond to that. So one of our recommendation and the final statement before the elections was for every personnel deployed, they should be properly trained, and they must act responsibly and professionally and act in a civil manner towards citizens, because there are major responsibilities to protect lives and properties and to ensure that the rights of citizens to vote and participate was protected and not infringed upon. And also for observer groups, they have a right to move and observe the elections, and security personnel must ensure they conduct themselves properly without limiting or restricting the right to movement for observers, for instance, on elections day. So these were some of one of our recommendations for the elections was the need for elections results to be posted at every polling unit.
That's the 60E
Form EC.60E.
Yes.
EC.60E, because that is the result for the polling unit, to have that posted at the polling units. So we did advocate that INEC must ensure that it enforces that for every polling unit. The presiding officers must have that at the polling, so citizens can see the vote and can follow through with the collation process also, because we also asked for access to observing the collation centers for citizen observers, observer groups that want to observe that.
So, having gone through the pre-election, some of the criteria you did recommend to INEC and all the stakeholders before the election, the results, the security, the hate speech vote, inducement and buying and the likes of that, conduct of INEC officials, observers' access to collation center. Those were some of the issues you raised. Now, I'm a little bit concerned because this Ekiti election, best described in the most unnice way, would mean it was designed to be a crude election. You said something about the fact that issues that were raised, that people should vote for the issues that were on ground. But these are people who, by social profiling, best described, they've been cultured along stomach infrastructure. Let me use the phrase of the outgoing governor, stomach infrastructure. So one is confused as regards what exactly the electorate, the people who have the power to vote, will be attracted to. It was not much about the candidate as much as about the issues that appeal to them. So one would wonder about, I'm connecting that idea now, the stomach infrastructure, the sustenance infrastructure, to the idea of vote buying and inducement. It looked like pretty much it was an environment outside the polling unit, not too far from there, and it was an occurrence that was being practiced by anybody or any of the parties who had reasonable funding to do so, from 3,000, 4,000 and it's a very, very expensive polling unit. It had as much as 5,000 to go to people. What's your take regarding that? Because it looked like it was a free trading environment and there was nothing INEC could do about it.
Well, so the thing about stomach infrastructure, if you remember in 2014, that became the popular term, and everywhere you'd go, you'd hear stomach infrastructure. And I think the whole culture of vote buying did begin in, I wouldn't say it began, or let's say it became more obvious from 2014 Ekiti elections. Now the thing about voter inducement and vote buying is when you can't look at this as an isolated case. You need to conceptualize it and contextualize it within the system that we live in. So what is the socioeconomic situation of the people of Ekiti State? Now Ekiti State is one of the smallest states in Nigeria, but yet the level of poverty is on the increase. You have a state where salaries have not been paid 7 months plus. You have a state where even institutions are no longer functioning. And the thing about poverty is when a people become impoverished, it also means that their sense of judgment or their sense of responsibility is somehow watered down, in the sense that anything that gives them access to funds or something that they feel will sustain them for the moment would become a trend, will become their major focus and interest. And that was what we saw happening when the people are poor, when the people feel governance is not delivering dividends of democracy. It's easy to buy them off, and that is what the political elites have learned, that the more you impoverish, it's not just a Nigerian problem, and it's not even just an African problem, right? But that is what they've learned, is a tactic that when you impoverish a people, you leave them fettered to just thinking that anything you give me now is what I need to sustain myself. Because when you're hungry, if someone gives you a loaf of bread, the person has become your god, because you've not seen anything to eat. And that is what happens. So I feel beyond vote buying, it's something that is a negative, horrible trend. But to even address that, we need to start addressing the socioeconomic problem that we have, the economic challenges that we have. Ekiti is not the only place vote buying happening. In Anambra, we saw vote buying happening. It was even open. Now in Ekiti, it was a bit hidden, because on polling units I went to, I didn't even know it was going on. One place, a voter had to approach me, and he said, "Observer, right?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Please come, let me show you somewhere. They are giving money and they are hiding and everything," because they wanted me to take a report. I'm like, I can't go and stop. I'm not security, I'm just an observer. All I can do is take down the report. So some places it was hidden. Now in Anambra, it wasn't even that hidden. At polling unit, you see it going on. In fact, voters were bargaining. How much will you give me with different parties, right? We also saw that in Ondo, one of the candidates for Ondo, a female candidate, when we were discussing about the challenges of women and youth, and she told me that she ran as a candidate in Ondo governorship election, but she didn't have the money she needed to buy enough votes to win. And to her, she felt disadvantaged because she felt she was competent, she had a capacity, she had issues, she had a manifesto, and she wanted to convince people based on that. But people were asking her, this party is giving this, what would you give us? Because to them, that is all they can get at this moment. After the elections, we won't see you people anymore. You would go till 4 years time, but now we see you, you'd give it to, I want to get that. So in Ekiti, it wasn't that different. In fact, before the election, some voters were moving to places. They will ask, where did they share? Where is it happening? So some voters were even collecting from different parties, benefiting from all, because they felt, let's get what we can get now. This is the only time we'll see that. And unfortunately, on elections, the vote buying became a thing. And people are talking about it now. And I feel perhaps when it's not just an Ekiti thing, perhaps we are making this a big issue because the PDP lost, for one, and there's that fear that the APC won because they had more money. But truth be told, both parties gave out money.
True.
Both parties indulged in voter inducement. Both parties have a major stake in promoting democratic development, and both parties are failing in doing that. So I wouldn't even go, I'm not one to, no party should cry victim or to play victim, because you both indulged in this.
So it's even more tricky. Let me get into some case study. It's a case study that I wanted to describe as isolated, but it becomes quite interesting when it is described, and I'm going to simulate a case study now because it's something that we did follow through, that some of the security officials on ground helped ensure, or confirm what party electorates did go into the booth to vote, either by indicating thumbs up or what thumb or what, just to give indication, and that was their way of certifying to those who were giving money to some of the electorates to say, hey, he voted in this, he voted for that. And I'm concerned about the concept of secret balloting in Nigeria. Does that still hold ground anymore?
Well, voting should be open ballots. Secret. It should be an open secret ballot system rather. And unfortunately, we are having that process undermined, and that is one of our recommendations to INEC, is to focus more on the setup of polling, not more, but to pay more attention to setup of polling, because the way you set up a polling booth, for instance, where you go to thumbprint, would also determine or limit the tendency of a third party in finding out or knowing who you voted for. And that is one of the things we're advocating for, because I would say, in all honesty, in some parties polling units I went to, it's the way it was set up, it's easy for someone to give a thumbs up or to raise a ballot for someone else to see. And that, to me, is where we need to start addressing the whole concept of secrecy of the ballots. But on the issue of the security, yes, some security personnel may have aided that vote buying, and then some voters may also have, party agents did aid that. But I also was at a polling unit where a police officer, a female, and I think because I'm a woman, I would always want to tell her story, and because she stood and she observed that the voter wanted to do something, yes, and then she went to him and said, my friend, will you thumbprint and leave this booth? How long will it take you to thumbprint? Because it shouldn't take you long, you should just thumbprint, fold and leave. But he was trying to, when someone wants something shady, the person is taking longer time. She said, why are you spending so much time? Just thumbprint. Don't know your party to thumbprint for, thumbprint and leave. And I was trying to raise the ballot. She told him, if you raise this ballot, if you raise your ballot paper, I'm going to collect it from you, because it means you don't want to vote. And then he was like, madam, why were you talking to me like? Because he was an elderly guy, so probably maybe older than her a bit, or maybe the same age. And she told him, if you do that, I will tell you I'm security here, unless you want us to arrest you for an electoral offense. And she was quite stern. Even at some point, she got angry and said, because I'm a woman, I'm talking to you, you can't listen to me, because he wanted to trivialize what she was doing, and then say, this woman, I was like, this woman, what is your own over Sabi? And then she was firm, and I was impressed by that, and I said, I wish we have more security personnel who would be like this, that basically would stand and say, if I see you raise your ballots, there's going to be a problem. If I see you talk to someone while you're doing your ballots or try to use your phone, there's going to be a problem. Just thumbprint and leave. So that is why I say, why some security may have aided that, but I feel security, they have a huge role to play in reducing or limiting the whole trend on vote buying. Because if at polling booths, if they start making arrests of people selling or buying votes, and people get prosecuted, because this is a criminal, it's an offense under the Electoral Act, Section 124 of the Electoral Act. So, and it has a fine of 500,000 naira or 12 months imprisonment. Meaning, if you make arrest and prosecute, such a person could actually serve a jail term or pay a fine. And if we start doing that, it would reduce the way. For me, I don't think you can even move further, in the sense that for parties that even indulge in that, if you start limiting access to ballots based on your involvement in vote buying or selling, perhaps parties will also start learning, because it's one thing to want to sell your vote, but if there's no willing buyer, you wouldn't want to sell, right? So if you're not hard on the buyers of the votes, stopping the sellers would not necessarily make any impact. So if we focus on those who are ready to buy and start prosecuting and punishing them, is going to reduce the tendency of wanting to buy, because then sellers would also know that someone can be punished.
So there's this postulation, and I say postulation because it's not proven yet, and I find it quite interesting. It's something among the Journalists League we've been discussing for some time, the electoral law, that the way it is being framed and the way it's being implemented in Nigeria, especially when it comes to election day, it looks like there are some gaps that people are now possibly getting the best of. Let me give you an example. You talked about the mobile phone in the ballot box with an electorate who wants to vote. In some situations, we've observed, and over time reports have shown that electorates can actually use their mobile phone, snap the ballot paper they want to vote for, or the candidate they voted for, as a way of proving to the parties involved to say, see, this is where I am, and this is what I have voted for. That's on one part. And then you have the other issue, which is, I believe, is going to be the biggest issue in the days to come. We have 68 political parties. Ekiti State offered 35 candidates, and you just talked about the fact that the ballot paper had several sides. So I'm wondering, is there fairness in the display or in the positioning of either the party logo or candidate's name and the likes of that? Because of course we know that we have from the alphabet A all the way to U all the possible acronyms that could be represented in a party and candidates and the likes of that. And if you have it on maybe an extended sheet, do you think the electorate will get that right in terms of the options? Do you think we're expanding? Because over 105 groups applied recently to INEC to say, oh, we still want a political party for ourselves going. Is it feasible? Is this sustainable to have more political parties in the name of opening up the democratic space?
Well, the thing about parties' participation is that it's a fundamental right. And the right to association, which is a fundamental human right recognized both internationally, regionally, and nationally. So you wouldn't want to restrict or put a stop people from registering political parties, because you have a problem with the ballot. Now you look, so many countries have. In South Africa, they have. I can't remember the number, but over 50 parties, for instance. You go to the US. The US has a lot of political parties. People form political parties almost every day, and so in different countries you have that. But the thing about democracy, especially the system that we practice, is the fact that irrespective of the number of parties we have, is a multi-party system, but there's always a tendency to have two dominant parties, and then you have other parties within the parliamentary. When it comes to legislative houses, that's where you see representation from other parties. And why am I saying that? That is one thing to have a political party, but it's another thing to contest for an office. And I feel what parties in Nigeria, what we're yet to understand as political parties, is you don't have to compete for every election just for the sake of being on the ballot paper. You need to find out where you have your strength and compete for those seats and remain within your sphere of influence, because that way you can make impact and also make your party popular within its sphere of influence. But what we have is parties want to register, candidates want to run, everyone wants to be a one-time presidential aspirant, a one-time governorship aspirant. It's good to aspire to run for office, but I also feel at some point we would need to ask ourselves some questions that how many parties do we want? That's a debate that needs to go on. The debate on the access to ballots, because the more parties register, the more you have parties that want to contest for office, either for president, for the executive, for governorship, like we had in Ekiti. The more you have the ballot paper increase. But then also is the fact that the beauty about rights is institutions are there to facilitate this right. And INEC as an institution in a constitutional democracy cannot limit or restrict some rights that is unless it's within the ambit of the law. And that is what that is why INEC, no matter what, as long as parties indicate interest to run for office and they have adhered to the rules and guidelines for party primaries and nominating candidates, INEC cannot say no to a party that submits a candidate. So what INEC is supposed to do is to facilitate the right to freedom of assembly, right to vote and be voted for, which is what INEC will do in ensuring it produces a ballot. So that's the democracy comes with its challenges, right? But so far, that is a system of government that allows everyone to participate. So there's this judgment in the Israeli constitutional court, where it says sometimes democracy will have to fight with its arms tied behind its back, because it's not every time democracy will fight with both arms. Sometimes it's limited or restricted because of the existence of fundamental human rights, and no matter what, institutions would have to respect that, and that is the challenge we have. But there's always an opening, or an opportunity to have conversations on the way forward, or what works best for us. And I'm not one to say best practices. I believe in best fit practices. So for us, if as a country we need to decide what suits our local context, what is that practice that suits us the most, and we adopt that. I'm not one to say let's adopt this because another country has succeeded. Yes. But how is it working there? Why is it working there? Perhaps their context enables its functionality. So why not we bring what would promote our own system in the best possible way? So for that issue would always be there. The smaller parties will always tell you, well, they're already disadvantaged because they're not the major party. And that's why when you talk of access to media, for instance, for parties, there's always that emphasis. Every media platform must grant access to all the political parties because they are equal contestants, irrespective of their size or their resources. So that is democracy. Is democracy. And if you're a democratic, if you want to promote democratic principles, you need to promote it to the latter. You can't choose one and leave the other. That's the beauty. It comes with a challenge, but we're supposed to be smart and rational people that can come up with ideas on how to make things work. So I think we can always make things work.
Rational people under irrational circumstances.
Yes.
Let's conclude by just looking at the figures that best described the election. Watching the vote team, margin of accuracy for this election, the utmost one was just over 2%, even less than 5%.
Yes.
INEC did produce the result that said the governor-elect now, Fayemi, had 51.3% of the vote, while the runner-up to him, Kolapo Lushola, Professor, 46.3%. Watching the vote in itself produced the result as 59.9%, and then you had Kolapo's result at 45.9%. Quite close margins with the authenticated result by INEC. How does Watching the Vote do it over and over again? Because I remember the Anambra election spot on in terms of that, and as well this other election also proves the same.
Yeah, so for Watching the Vote, for election day observation, we deploy the parallel vote tabulation, the PVT. And what the PVT does is, one, it enables independent non-partisan observer groups to observe the quality of voting and counting, that's the process itself, and to estimate the results, thereby verifying the accuracy of the result. And in doing that, when PVT deploys statistical principles and ICT. So for us to give a projection or to give our estimate, there are steps that we need to follow, and that is why it's a project that for implementation you plan months ahead. First, one of the things we do first is to sample the polling units. So within the universe of polling units, like in Ekiti, we had 2,195 polling units in Ekiti State. We do a random sample of the polling units using two tools called stratification and randomization. Now, to stratify is to break down into smaller pieces, into smaller sizes at different levels, and to randomize is to randomly select without bias or prejudice. So if I want to break it down in simple terms, just like when you want to go for malaria test, for instance, you don't need to extract, the doctor will not drain you from draining all the blood from your system to find out if you have malaria. All they do is take a sample, right, and they test, and they can tell you that. The same thing if you're cooking, if you want to know if the salt is okay, or if it's spicy, if it's as spicy as you want, you just stir and you take a bit and you test. Now that is what PVT basically does. It stirs and it picks in such a way that it's representative. Now, stratification helps us ensure it is representative. So for each local government in the state, the number of polling units that INEC has, the percentage of polling units to the total, is what our sample will be drawing. So if, for instance, in F1 local government, the percentage of polling units is about 5.4% of INEC's polling units compared to the total, our sample will also be 5% of our sample. So we drew a sample of 250 in the state, and each local government a representative of the whole. Now, why we do that is, if by using these two principles, statistical principles, it enables us give a report that is representative of a whole. So we don't need to be everywhere to give you reports. And that is why if you look at Watching the Vote reports, we give estimates and projections, and we work within a margin of error. And mostly what the margin of error is, the margin of error just tells us when to stop trusting the results. It's not about the quality. Quality of our PVT is determined by our response rate, and our response rate is 100%. That is why when we sample our polling units, we need to recruit observers from the sampled polling units, and we train the observers, then we deploy, and they report their findings from their sample polling units using the checklist that we already designed, and they send the report to our database using their phones via coded text messages. So the messages that come to only the database would understand that. If you look at it from as an outsider, you would understand, because it's actually alphanumeric in nature, and the analysis is done within our database. Now we just do the narrative using the figures already. We don't manipulate anything, the system does it. So for us, our focus is to ensure our observers are properly trained and they are deployed to their sample polling and they report, because what determines the quality of our findings is the response rate from the observers. Now, margin of error just tells us, okay, you're either plus or minus 5%, and for Ekiti, in fact, it was a smaller margin of error. So I can say we were more than 95% confident in our data. And why we wanted people to trust in it in Ekiti was before INEC released its results, the night before, we had issued a statement giving an estimate of voter turnout and saying, if INEC voter turnout doesn't fall within these estimates, don't trust the results, because from turnout you can, results are based on turnout, basically how many the total vote and all. We get turnout from total votes. If INEC's results doesn't fall within this estimate, turnout doesn't fall, then we don't trust it. Also, we are given the projection that no party will win the elections with more than 57.8% of the vote. That's about 50. Let's just say if you round it up, 56%, sorry, 55 points here. So we are giving a statement saying no party would win this election with more than 56% of the total vote cast. And so because we can't release results, we can't announce results. We are not the Electoral Commission. Now, INEC has the responsibility to announce the results. All we do is verify based on our estimate. That is why our statement comes after INEC gives its own results. But with the PVT, our first sample is representative of the whole, and our findings are representative, and we deploy this in Anambra. We confirmed and verified that the APGA did win the elections. In 2014, the PVT was deployed, and the PVT verified that the PDP then won the elections. And everyone accepted that was after INEC gave their findings. The PVT was deployed by another organization, and they verified that the result was actually accurate. So we started deploying it in Ondo 2016. We verified the accuracy of the results in Anambra and now in Ekiti, and we'll also deploy it in Osun in 2019. If for any reason, Osun, yes, in 2019. If for any reason our findings show there was a manipulation, what we have a responsibility to expose it, and that's why we always say in our statement, if the result has been manipulated, we will expose it, because PVT, besides providing information on the process, also detects and detects fraud. And that is why before the elections results, before our verification statements, we give daily updates, because our reports come at different times. The first is at 7:30 a.m. At 8 a.m. then we have that on acquisition and vote, which comes at 2 p.m. So at every point on elections day, we give updates. So at 7:30 a.m. we could tell you how many polling units had INEC officials and materials present. That means open. And we did verify that by 7:30 a.m. about 78% of our sample polling units had INEC materials and officials present, which was an improvement from Anambra, where at 8 p.m. we just had 6% open. So it was a very fairly good process. INEC-wise, INEC did improve, but then the whole vote buying did become an issue after the elections. But if you want to talk about the results, we did verify its accuracy, and we urge parties to accept that no one likes to lose elections. as individuals, we don't like to lose competition. So we don't expect people to be happy when they lose elections. But sometimes it's also good to listen to independent groups that give you reports, because those are independent eyes watching the process, and that is what Watching the Vote did. But if for any reason parties still feel aggrieved, the best thing to do is to go to court and challenge that, because you have a right to challenge the result.
Redress.
Yeah, seek for legal redress. So we're not asking parties not to do that, but we're saying sometimes you need to also accept that the results did reflect what happened at the polls. Everyone can be surprised. Sometimes you're so sure you're going to win an election, then you don't. But sometimes you're not certain you would win, and you do, and it happens at different elections. But within the African continent, we've always encouraged parties to learn to accept the outcome of elections. But in any case, if you don't, please challenge it within the ambits of the law.
I have to say a very big thank you to Cynthia Mbamalu of YIAGA Africa. She's also the team leader for Watching the Vote. Many thanks to you for having this conversation. We do hope to be alongside with you as we approach your show election. And of course, the 2019 election in itself. That's how much we can take of this very interview on Good Morning Africa. Thank you so much for joining in, and stay close. We have more coming up for you on amplifiedradio.net.